never say anything about this. Your mama never listened to a word that you say. Simple little words just to make another change. So lady in my grave, holding the gaps and they can't get up, holding up the ropes and they get so tough. Strategy, thoughts till I'm on the top. And I won't cry for help. The lies, the truth, to ease the pain. You know you got to say, I think. Child forced to lose again. Now they recognize your name. Simple word is all I say. No more lies and arguments. Start again, start again. Turn around, don't you come back this way. I hold my ground, never take your judgment. Whoa, don't turn around, don't you come back this way. I hold my ground, never take your judgment. So why you gotta lie for? Why you gotta speak for? Why you wanna tell all the...
Hello. I'll hear it from over there anyway. Okay, so we're just going to get started in about 2 minutes. So if everyone just wants to top up their glasses, make their way over to this side of the room and we'll get underway. Thank you.
Ride your set, I'm turning around, getting them out, setting me out, figure it out, speak your mind, define me. Hold up, you gotta tell me now so we can figure it out. Let me know what you been thinking about. Whoa, where do you go, where do you go, where do you go? Nah, 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 no. Turn around, don't you come back this way. I hold my ground, never take your judgment. Whoa, don't turn around, don't you come back this way. I hold my ground, never take your judgment. Turn around, don't you come back this way. I hold my ground, never take your judgment. Whoa, don't turn around, don't you come back this way. I hold my ground, never take your judgment. Turn around, don't you come back this way. I hold my ground, never take your judgment. Whoa, don't turn around, don't you come back this way. I hold my ground, never take your judgment.
Okay, folks, if you could please take your seats, that'd be great. We'll get underway. Thanks.
Ooh, settle. Okay, let's get into this.
Yeah. Well, welcome everybody on behalf of IT Professionals New Zealand and NZTech and Internet New Zealand as well, who are looking after the live stream. It's good to have us all here. I think we've got probably close to 100 people in the room, and it'll be interesting to see how many people are watching on the live stream, so it'll be good.
So we just both wanted to hop up here because there's two, at least possibly three industry groups come together to make this happen. ITP, NZTech and Internet NZ. And so some of you will wonder, who are you if I stand up there and welcome you? And some of you will wonder, who is he if he stands and welcome? So I'm Graham Muller, CEO of NZTech, and thank you for coming along and supporting this.
And Paul Matthews, Chief Executive of IT Professionals New Zealand.
Between the two of us, we represent close to 150,000 people on your behalf when we're dealing with the government. Take note. And just over 500 companies. And the tech sector, I reported on it at our AGM just before, the tech sector in 2016 accounted for 21,168 companies and 6% of the workforce now, so 123,000 people. NZTech's membership base has also expanded to include a large number of corporations, pretty much all the banks, universities, some government agencies, as well as IT companies, international high-tech manufacturers, etc. So we thought, what better way to influence the government and the future government by having a discussion with them about some work that we did together with 20 other organisations around what the Tech Manifesto is.
Excellent. So now you'll notice that there are three people up here, as well as Rob O'Neill at the end, our MC and facilitator. Unfortunately, Claire Curran is unable to join us. She's actually in a tent in the Octagon in Dunedin, protesting about some Winds matters. So she unfortunately pulled out yesterday, so won't be here today. But otherwise, we've got Rob O'Neill, who is our MC and facilitator, who's come in, and we'll try and keep these guys in line.
Good evening.
And I think you've got a loud clap for when they go over time. But we'll just pass things over to Rob now, and he can introduce the panel and go from there. So thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Yeah, big thanks to the IT Professionals New Zealand, NZTech and Internet New Zealand for organising this, and also a big congratulations to the entire industry for this manifesto. I don't think I've ever seen so many tech industry groups and signatures on one document before, and I must study it and see who's missing. There might be a story there. I'm a journalist after all. But anyway, we've had a couple of changes to the panel, as you've heard. Claire's not here. Gareth Hughes has had to pull out from the Greens on it because due to a family matter. However, we now have Barry Coates down here, standing in at short notice. So thank you very much, Barry. We're also very pleased to welcome Brett Hudson, MP for the National Party, who actually has quite a strong history in our industry, but I'll leave him to introduce himself in a second. And we've got Tracy Martin, spokesperson, ICT spokesperson for NZ First. She's been their ICT spokesperson for some time, so looking forward to hearing your insights. Thank you very much, Tracy. The panel format is we're going to have 2 minutes intro from each person very shortly, and then we'll go into 15-minute segments on different topics. So the topics we'll be covering will be skills and people, business and the economy, the future of government, and then open questions from the floor. Inside each of those segments, though, we will also be taking questions from the floor and also from the internet. Now, we've got somebody representing the internet here. Where's the internet? Andrew, there he is. Okay, that's the internet over there. So I have to keep an eye out for him. Okay. So we'll try and keep the questions within the topic of that section. Please keep the questions brief from the floor. We're here to listen to the panel and not necessarily to a speech from the floor. So thank you very much. I'll cut it off if it goes on too long. The panellists have been asked to keep their answers to 1 minute for initial questions and 40 seconds for others to make sure that you have time to cover a lot of topics. Right, so I guess if we can have an introduction maybe from each of you. We're going to start with, this is a random order that's been pre-drawn, so we're going to start with NZ first. So Tracy.
Kia ora. Thank you very much for the invitation. So I'm Tracy Martin. I've been a Member of Parliament for New Zealand First for the last 6 years. Now, I know none of you know that because obviously New Zealand First is only made up of Winston Peters. So I brought along flyers to tell you who I am and what I'm doing, because in 2 minutes I couldn't possibly tell you that. So if you want to know more once you've heard me speak, come and grab a flyer. So I've been the IT spokesperson along with the education from the cradle to the grave, women, communications and broadcasting spokesperson for the last 6 years. I developed the policy. And the only thing I want to say with regard to Graham's introduction is, just to clarify something, and I just said it to Mitchell as well, the industry needs to be talking to Parliament, not talking to government. Governments change. Parliament is made up of all those players that you never know in 3 years might be the people that you're then going to have to deal with. And from that perspective, because there is nothing political about what Graham comes to talk to me about. He comes to talk to me about, because he has come and seen me, he talks to me about what is happening in your industry, what are the challenges in your industry, how does that need to be addressed by whoever is in government. And so that means that I'm fully up to speed, or as up to speed as any politician can be, considering we don't work in your industry. So I'm up to speed should, at the 23rd of September, or any other election after that, make a change. And then I'm not miles behind the 8 ball and you've got to start all this work again. So I tell that to the student associations, I tell that to every organisation in New Zealand that needs to have government participate in their sector, talk to the Parliament, not to the government. I'm not saying don't talk to the government, I'm saying talk to all. So from that perspective, first of all, and thank you very much for the digital manifesto. I mean, it's amazing. It works, and so many parts of it actually work in with our upfront investment tertiary policy, which is around workforce and skills planning, around how that is going to affect immigration, how that's going to affect training up our own, how that's going to make sure that the industry can continue to grow because it has access to the skills and the people that it needs, while at the same time developing New Zealanders. So I think that's probably around about 2 minutes, but I want to thank you for the digital manifesto. It's the type of thing a politician loves because it tells us directly what the industry wants, what the industry needs, and then we cast our party lens over it and see how we can actually affect it. Kia ora.
Thank you very much, Tracy. Now, Brett, from National's point of view, 2 minutes, away you go.
Thank you very much, and it's an absolute pleasure to be here. I will admit very proudly, in fact, that I am a member of ITP. And I'm also a member of Internet New Zealand and a strong supporter of what NZTech do. My background is IT. I had 20 years in the industry before entering politics, and it's a very big part of why I sought selection with the National Party and into Parliament. My background in IT was largely in sales and around business optimisation or what you might call transformation, although it's a bit of a cliche. By the way, if you want to look for someone to either thank or blame, if you ever call Inland Revenue and hear a message, welcome to Inland Revenue, in a few words, tell us how we can help you today, if you think that's a really, really good system and takes you where in the organisation you need to be, then thank all the members of the team I worked with and our partners and Inland Revenue for being future thinking. And if you think it's a really bad experience, blame me. I was at Telstra Clear when we put that into Inland Revenue back in 07 and 08. I think looking at our industry, like the future for our industry, really where we need to be focused on is thinking about where are our barriers and constraints. It's making sure we get into markets and that we're adequately protected in the markets that we participate in. It means making sure that there's investment opportunities into our industry. Domestic would be great, but in the absence of an appetite locally, then foreign investment. We've got to make sure the skills are there and being developed to feed the industry and feed the growth. And where the skills are still in the pipeline, we need to be very open to bringing skills in from around the world and actually making what we do all the better. I think those are the key challenges. There'll be some more, I'm sure. In terms of the manifesto, if you look at the digital economy program that is being run under MB, I think you'll see that a lot of what you raise in the manifesto is being thought of by government already. We may not agree 100% on all of the elements or all of the priorities, but I think everything that you raise, and it's all valid, is in fact being considered. So a real opportunity to work together to get a good outcome.
Thank you very much, Brett. And Barry, from the Greens, away you go.
Kia ora, ngā mihi nui kia koutou. I'm Barry Coates. I'm the most recent Member of Parliament for the Green Party. I just entered Parliament last October when somebody called Kevin Haig stepped down. I'm not from the tech industry. I studied economics when I was younger and have worked in a lot of areas, primarily around the environment and sustainability from the Earth Summit in 1992, if any of you remember that. And then in international development, most recently 10 years as head of Oxfam New Zealand. In between times, I've done, I got a master's from Yale in management and I was a strategy consultant for a while and did a number of programs around R&D and innovation and technology. but I am by no means an expert. I've also been called into this debate on fairly short notice because my colleague Gareth Hughes, who would have been here, has a personal issue at home, and so he couldn't make it. So he gave me a call, and I'm very, very pleased to be here, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. Like others, I thought the manifesto for the election was really good, really helpful, and I think there's plenty of juicy stuff for us to talk about. I would say that naturally the Green Party is future-oriented. We're looking at a modern, high-tech economy that is clean, low emissions, and future-oriented. So by inclination, I think we're pretty supportive of the issues that are raised in this program of work. So look forward to the discussion, and thank you for having me here.
Thank you very much, Barry. Okay, so we're going to move into the sections, and as I said, I'm just going to ask some introductory questions, and not necessarily of everybody on the panel, but we're going to try and spread it around as much as we can, and then we'll be taking some questions from the floor and from the internet. So the first question we'd like to ask is in the skills and people section that we're going to talk about first, is in education. The government announced a major change in the school curriculum last month with digital technologies becoming compulsory for years 1 to 10, and significant funding announced to get teachers up to speed. It would have been nice to know Labor's perspective too, but let's start things off by asking the Greens and New Zealand First what you thought of this, whether you support what has been proposed, and most importantly, whether you're prepared to commit to retaining the plan and funding it if you become government after the election.
Easy one on that. Yes, we are. We're looking forward to strengthening the digital and technology component of the curriculum. All told, I mean, the important thing for most kids is they will have many different jobs across many different areas in their lifetimes. They need education not only in the tools, but actually how to think about technology and how to understand it. So it's we think what's important is to not do what some schools do, which is say that using technology tools, using computers as part of computer training, but actually to have them understand the basis of the technology and how it works as a way for them to become more skilled for all the developments which cannot foresee in the future. And the final things, we need teacher training in order to be able to support this, and that's woefully lacking at the moment. And we need proper career advice by professionals when kids are looking at what they will do after leaving school. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Barry. Tracy?
Yeah, so from our perspective, so we've had digital literacy in the school curriculum for a number of years. It's embedded inside the curriculum already. What we're talking about is digital fluency. So that's the difference. So that's the difference between using a device and actually then knowing actually how that device creates the outcome that you want. Right? So that's what's been suggested and is being woven through the New Zealand curriculum. Certainly supportive. Yes, we need to upskill our teaching staff, predominantly at primary school area. But I think what we're looking at from the New Zealand First perspective is we're actually looking more at the secondary school level, and I had this conversation with the CEO of Orion Health. We're looking more at having mentor teachers who have the pedagogy, the understanding of how learning happens, and can support more e-learning so that we can Skype in skills and specialists. So there's a couple of things there. One, we need to actually prepare our secondary schools for greater e-learning inside their physical bricks and mortar schools so that they can be supported by mentor teachers, but that we can import the skills, because we will never keep our teaching force up to date with the speed with which this industry changes. Secondly, we need to, I actually think it's wrong that the digital fluency at secondary school level particularly has been placed inside the technology area. I think it should have been placed inside the sciences. And so from our perspective, I'll be interested to see how that flows out. I'm on the board of trustees at Maharene College. We're just having this whole conversation now about shifting our curriculum to better support our young people in this. And it will be interesting to see how it does in the technologies as opposed to how it is in the sciences. But we need to upskill our young people. We need to upskill their parents to understand what this is and what the opportunities are, because they have a great influence on the pathways that their young people pick. And Gary is right, we need to upskill our careers and transition staff.
Great, thank you very much. Now, any questions from the floor or from the internet on education and skills? Yes.
I'd just like to comment that I was on an advisory board to the then Department of Education in 1989, and I've actually heard all those words before. So I'm just very keen that action is taken, and I strongly support the statement that move IT away from technology. If you want to have a motor industry, you've got to teach people to drive, you've got to teach people to service the cars, you've got to teach people to build the cars, and you've got to teach people to design the cars. And we should be in the area of designing.
Aye.
The top of the sequence.
And I don't disagree with you. I think what's really interesting about the New Zealand, and what many people don't know about the New Zealand school classroom, particularly the primary school classroom, is for over 20 years, we have actually had digital technology in the back of every classroom. So our children have had hands-on. The Japanese classroom still doesn't have technology inside of it. The Japanese still do not have mobile phones allowed inside their classroom, neither do the Finnish. So we have, from a literacy perspective, we've had that, right? From a programming, from a language perspective, we have been curtailed. But you cannot, I think it's too big an ask to actually ask that of our teaching staff. We need to be bringing in, once upon a time, and in 2009, all the curriculum specialists were cut. This is an area of curriculum speciality that must be supported inside every classroom. You cannot ask it of a generalised teacher.
Thank you, Tracy. I'd like to open that up for Brett, actually, if you wanted to respond to some of those
Thank
comments.
you. Actually, about the history, actually, of digital technology type teaching in New Zealand. Actually, one of the greater problems we've had, this goes all the way back to when we first had computers in school when I was at secondary school. The challenge has always been that most of the teaching staff have been involved in the area out of a hobby, rather than as a profession or as a deep course of study prior to entering teaching. So the big thing about this plan, and Barry talked about teacher training, is it sets aside $23 million for training around the curriculum, $24 million actually, $9 million for specialised training for teachers, and $15 million to roll the curriculum out, so you get teachers as part of the embedding of it. So I actually think that's the enormous step change, is because it's not about a desire to teach technology, the use or thinking around technology. It's actually making sure that we've got the skilled educators to be able to deliver it, and that's the big thing of the $40 million package.
I think they need to be very clear about whether they're talking about primary or secondary, because every time I hear people talk about this, they're talking about secondary, and yet what is being implemented through the 23 million is actually aimed at primary. So there's quite a difference between what Brett's talking about and which sector of the industry, of the education sector you talk about. Because this industry moves too fast to dump $23 million in it and then decide that that's it. This industry moves too quickly to decide that teachers can be taught.
Thank you very much. Brett, do you want to have a last word on that?
Oh, just make a note that educators, and the ones that I've met with, actually point out the best way to get children or learners interested in ICT as a potential career path is to start them young and to make it fun. Now, the innovative learning environments that have been slowly rolled out around schools around New Zealand are fantastic vehicles for introducing that. This package will add further strength and depth to that. I actually think it's a fantastic step, particularly as I said to begin with, skills are one of the challenges that we've got if we want to grow the impact of ICT beyond where it is in the economy already.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other questions from the floor? Yes, we've got one from the internet. Andrew.
Skills development is a fantastic idea, particularly in that school front. But what about the millions of people that are already in the workforce and already in work in digitising industries? What are we going to do to lift their skill base?
Right.
Okay, I'd like to get Barry maybe to respond to that one.
So, I mean, there are several answers to that. A number of people do need the sort of vocational training support, and that's kind of one aspect. The other thing is, this government has ended the system of community education. Once upon a time, we had the opportunity for people to have lifelong learning and opportunities to learn new skills through community education. I think that's a real loss in terms of being able to equip more people in our society to be fluent digitally, and I think it's plays into the digital divide. You know, we can easily talk about a few people who are already skilled in the sector being upskilled, and that's great. But we also have to pay attention to the fact that there are many people who are excluded from the digital world through poverty, not being able to afford to be digitally active, through a lack of skills, a lack of familiarity, a lack of environment around them that uses technology. And I think that we need to do far more to include people across our society. It starts with fairly basic work around poverty reduction, and I think it's one of our major challenges. If we want to upskill as a society, then we need to include everyone, not just the professionals and the experts.
Okay, great, thank you. Can we try and keep the answers down to about 40 seconds, thanks? So while we're going through
I can
this.
do that.
Okay, away you go.
Okay, you need to ask me for this, which is
I
our
don't actually have a second hand
universal
on this.
UFI, right? UFI policy, which includes workforce planning and actually upskilling and so on and so forth. You need to ask me about our business-linked internship scheme policy. You need to ask Brent why they cut computers in homes and SeniorNet. $3 million and $2 million. Now, it might not seem to you that computers in homes, upskilling digitally our poorer families, or SeniorNet, making sure that our 50-year-olds plus can continue to be participants in a digital environment is important, but it damn well is when the government starts to shift everything online and those people are still in the workforce. But for $5 million, they just cut it all.
I've got a great idea, let's ask Brett.
Well, actually, the part I did want to respond to was Barry's one, because this line has been around since before 2014. The government did not cut ACE funding. What it did was it reprioritised it away from
millions upon millions.
From Moroccan spiced chicken
They
running
never funded
to the
Moroccan
elements
spiced chicken.
to the elements of training and
That is
education
myth upon
that
myth.
actually help to develop work-ready skills,
Oh,
such
that
as
is such
English
a
as a second
rubbish.
language, numeracy and literacy.
Rubbish. I know. Ask me my facts, I'll tell you the facts.
Tracy, Brett, carry on.
So to your actually, the question actually from the internet, he's moved. The internet moves quickly. The actual real answer to that is the people with the most interest in putting that continuing development in place are actually the employers, because they're the ones that will benefit from those employees gaining greater skill for whatever their roles, current or future roles may be. So actually we should be placing a little bit of expectation and maybe even pressure on employers to look at continuous education for their staff.
Okay, now I'd like to move on to, thank you all very much, that was great, immigration. Immigration has been a big issue already in this election for both Labor and NZ First, especially talking about significantly reducing immigration levels. However, the only levers government really has to pull to reduce immigration are skilled migrants and students. Meantime, the tech sector suffers from a significant skills shortage and relies heavily on skilled migrants to support high-tech growth. For all panellists, but starting with NZ First, do you agree that reducing immigration will make it harder for New Zealand tech employers to bring in the skilled immigrants we need to grow? Why or why not?
Not under the levers that we're going to use, no. So now you're going to want me to explain that.
Yes,
First of all, just because an international student is an international student but doesn't mean they have to become a permanent migrant. And that's the problem. So New Zealand First, the policy I'm working with, the international student sector, with universities around, polytechs, and with the private providers is, how can we keep a $4 to $5 billion industry that is important to us, that also creates inter-country relationships? So let's keep that, but let's make sure that they aren't competing directly with New Zealanders for jobs, and let's make sure it's not a backdoor to immigration. So you haven't heard New Zealand First come out with a policy around international students because we're working with the sector on it. So that's the first thing. Secondly, there's an opportunity to advance through what is, there's already a work skills visa available in the agriculture sector. And we want to expand that for a period of time through into other sectors. And we're thinking horticulture, viticulture, IT could be one of them, other areas, while we train. Number 8 of our principles is we always will need immigration, but we refuse to allow it to excuse us from training and employing our own people.
Thank you very much,
Right.
Tracy. Thank you. Barry, well, we don't have Labor here to talk about their policy, so maybe, Barry, do you want to have a...
I certainly won't own Labor's policy on immigration. So the Greens have a broad policy on population that we want sustainable levels of population. What we've found recently is that the government has failed to invest in infrastructure. We haven't got enough houses in Auckland. We've got our traffic completely at a standstill in Auckland. So often immigrants are blamed for these problems of a lack of infrastructure. And we find that the debate around immigration soon gets to be vilifying particular groups, Asians or foreigners. and we think that's really unhealthy for New Zealand. We want to make sure that people who come to our country to work here with skills and make contributions to the economy are fully welcomed and are made to feel part of our society. And I think that's really important, that we do have the ability to attract people with skills to come to New Zealand and contribute, and perhaps no more so than the IT sector. So, you know, we're saying that this whole debate needs to be reframed to make sure that it doesn't descend into some kind of anti-foreigner sentiment.
Thank you very much, Barry. Brett?
Thank you. I certainly agree with Barry on that point about not making this thing about vilifying immigrants. I actually don't think it'll affect the skilled migrant thing, quite frankly, because the parties that have given a target won't be able to meet the target. Two targets that have been bandied around so far are 46 to 52,000 reduction and a 30,000 reduction, both from the same party. Now, the only way you can achieve that, and it's not me, this is Lloyd Burr from News Hub that did the analysis on this, the only way you can achieve those sorts of reductions are by drastically cutting international students and drastically cutting working visas, holiday working visas. Now, the international student cut would cripple, I think now the fourth largest export provider, and working holiday visas would simply result in a cut to opportunities for New Zealanders to explore the world. So a very, very bad idea indeed. But I will make a point that Tracy raised pathway or backdoor to residency for international students. It's near a myth. There are 20% of international students who might attain residency. 20%. 80% of them go home, because that's the basis on which they entered the country in the first place. But just on that point, if they do happen to do studies which are particularly useful for us and their skills are valuable to New Zealand, then why wouldn't we have them stay? There are gaps in our labour, in our workforce. Why wouldn't we use them to fill them?
Okay, thank you very much. Now, any questions from the floor on immigration? Or from the internet?
The internet again.
The internet's disappeared. Right down here now? Yep.
Over there in the blinding light.
Isn't
that the reason with immigration why Australia is getting harder on New Zealand?
Yes.
Because they're seen as a backdoor entry to there.
Yes.
And secondly, the students are only interested in staying or getting immigration so they can bring their parents out.
Well, the only thing is, Brenda's sort of right. There is a level of student that comes into New Zealand, that comes here, does the study and goes home. And then there is another level of student that has been coming into New Zealand, and his government has recently tried to tighten up on that level of student who comes in here to as a pathway to immigration. And we know why, because it's a great country to be. It's got nothing against that person independently. But it is, and it has affected our relationship with Australia.
Okay, thank you.
So-
Brett, Barry. Yeah, where you go.
Yeah, I mean, Brett said, you know, restrictions on immigration will destroy our international student industry. What'll destroy it is the kind of shocking regulation that we've seen in the past, where you've seen fraud with Indian students coming to New Zealand, and then those students being exploitation. Payment of below minimum wages, and then the Indian students are the ones who have to cop the flack from it. You know, there has been this failure in education before. It happened with Chinese students. We are losing our international reputation around this, and in terms of foreign education, we actually need to have a properly regulated sector, and that means regulating offshore. With the agents offshore, as well as properly regulating through immigration and through the tertiary institutions, and making sure that people aren't coming for low-grade qualifications.
Thank you, Barry. Brett?
So the two questions. The first point I make, the thing with Australia, the fundamental driver there is their economic position is far, far worse than ours. They've got some very serious problems. And one of the ways they are addressing that is through tightening up of migration and residency, and we're just caught in the crossfire. We occasionally get some dispensations, as we did on a pathway to residence for some Kiwis who have been there for years, but fundamentally we get caught up in a net where they're trying to address some of their economic woes by tightening up on migration. I actually now forgot the second part of the question.
Well, I'm going to say this. There's a state in Australia that refuses to accept our qualifications now, and if somebody goes over and says that this is the qualification I got in New Zealand, they have to reset a test at a local university.
Okay, I'm going to move on to the next section, actually. Oh, hold on, we've got a question from...
Kia ora.
Yeah, there we go, yes.
Tēnei te mihi ki a koutou, nā tēpū, e noho mai nei I runga te kaupapa nei, ko Anthony Roa tōku ingoa. My question is this, and I'm just going to start off by saying, you know, immigration is an important topic, and I don't think we need to shy away from that conversation, but I don't think you have got the basics right. And when I mean you, the political parties. I don't care what political party, all of you represent the Crown. And you have failed a part of our society for decades. And you are not doing enough about it. And so when we talk about digital literacy and digital fluency, what we haven't addressed is, in particular, those communities of the decile 1 to 3 schools, where we, as a trust, and I represent a couple of trusts, one in Pororua East in Wellington and one in Otaki, went out and personally borrowed hundreds of thousands of dollars in order to equip our children with the ability to take a device to school. Now, you might argue, well, we'll just fund schools to actually provide devices for these kids. But that doesn't work, because where does most of the learning happen? It doesn't actually happen at school any longer. It has to happen at home.
I'm sorry,
and
I'm going to interrupt you.
We're not doing anything about it. So here's my challenge.
Right.
Yeah.
What are you, as the Crown, as representatives of the Crown, going to do about this?
Are you from the Manaikalani?
No, I'm not.
Oh.
There are plenty of trusts. Manaikalani is not the only trust.
No, that's fine.
There's
I'm not trying to
truckloads
insult
of
you.
them
I'm
around
trying
the
to just
country,
clarify.
yes.
I didn't know
But
where you're from.
very similar approach, yes.
Right. So from our perspective, first of all, you need to ask me for our policy on Māori achieving as Māori inside education, first thing. Secondly, the concept of using what is currently the uncapped data that all schools have been wired up to deliver and pumping it out to our communities so that we have access without cost, because it's part of the conversation that we're having. And I'd like to see that the concept of that spread out further. I agree, and I sat on the digital literacy inquiry with Nikki Kay and so on and so forth. The device, access to the device was not the issue. Access to the signal, wherever you are, was the issue. And our families being able to actually connect to the internet so that they could continue to use their device. So that's a piece of policy work that I'm working on, but I don't have access to Treasury, unfortunately, to nut that down.
So very, very briefly, I agree with you completely. You know, when I talked about the digital divide, it has to start at the school level. And I think it's a symptom of the underfunding of our low decile schools. At the moment, the government said that they will go away from decile funding and they have some kind of hyper-targeting approach to individual kids. And I think we are skating over the problems of a long tail of education which is underperforming, and that needs to be reflected in proper investment in our low decile schools.
Thank you. First, I'll start off by saying you don't need to ask me anything. It's my responsibility to articulate to you what we're doing and why that's valuable to schools and communities. What I'd say to your challenging question, though, is a couple of things. First, in the area of investment and participation for Māori in particular in IT, there is a line of action and inquiry underway as part of that digital economy program that I mentioned in my introduction. And within that also is some study involving a range of the community and academia into digital isolation, the impacts, and that is intended to inform policy decisions of what to do about it. So I can't sit here tonight and say the decisions have been made and X amount of things or dollars to flow into those areas, but I can assure you that they are being looked at.
Okay, thank you very much. Moving on to the second topic, which is business and the economy, we'd like to start with growth. The tech sector is booming across New Zealand currently, but there's been a history of lots of companies reaching a certain size, then selling themselves off overseas, often with jobs following. While that's good for shareholders, do you see it as an issue for New Zealand? And if so, what would your government do to reduce that trend and keep tech firms in New Zealand ownership and profits and jobs in New Zealand? Brett?
Well, I'll start off on the investment side of it. The reality in New Zealand today is that the domestic appetite for investment in higher risk or tech industries is not where we'd like it to be. So if we want the industry to continue to grow at the pace it has been or faster, not only we basically have to welcome foreign direct investment and not see it as a bogeyman type thing. Investment into New Zealand creates jobs and lifts incomes. It also creates interesting products and intellectual property. It may be that we don't therefore own all of, or in some cases any of that IP, but we still gain skills and learning from those businesses that we participate in as employees. Ultimately, we have a bigger problem in the ICT type and the technology industries than we have in, say, the primary sector. Because as the saying goes, you can't take the land with you. As long as the taxable activity is taxed in New Zealand, then it doesn't matter who owns that land. But in a knowledge-based type economy, or an IP in particular, that asset can be purchased and taken away from New Zealand. That is just a reflective of the nature of the business. We can't really prevent it if we tried to. All we would do is cut off investment into New Zealand. But what we can do, and what people have done who have cashed up businesses, is what we see time again. They take that capital and reinvest it in a new venture.
Mm-hmm.
So as long as we continue doing that, we're still building the skills and knowledge base in New Zealand.
Okay. Who wants to pick that one up? Barry
Sure.
or
Yep.
Tracy? Yeah.
Yeah, I always talk. Okay, first of all, there's a difference between, I want to make it very clear, there's a difference between investment and ownership. New Zealand First is opposed to foreign ownership. New Zealand First has had no problem at all and has never said anything against foreign investment. So that's the first thing. We must have foreign investment, and we must actually encourage and grow, obviously, this industry. We're the only party inside our manifesto with a specific opportunity for funding for startup companies, for people between the age of 18 to 24. We also need to increase the amount of research money that we place inside of and support companies with. However, it is most likely that if a company goes and sells themselves off and they've had research money from the New Zealand taxpayer, that if they make a profit, they're going to have to pay that research money back so it can be refunded back into more research. And with regard to what would we as a government do to make sure that we retained more of our IP, then I can't answer that question because I've never been in government. But it's certainly something that we need to have a conversation around. The copyright, the whole concept of IP and copyright and who owns what inside this environment is so fluid at the moment. It's going to be one of the largest challenges for this particular industry, I think,
Thank you, Tracy.
as we go forward.
Thank you. Barry?
So this issue is bound up with what's happening to manufacturing in New Zealand, which has been on a steady decline for many years. It's great to see a technology-rich part of the manufacturing sector experiencing a revival. But it's still within an overall economic context of the economy being dominated by exports of commodities. You know, we're still sort of many years after entering the European or the common market when the UK went into the EU, we are still overly dependent on agricultural commodities, and we've got to prioritise the development of our technology and manufacturing sectors. And I think that New Zealand needs to actually be far more, the government needs to be far more aggressive in saying that we want to look to the industries of the future, not the industries of the past. We want to be the place where talent wants to live, because it's not just a question of having a company, it's the individuals, it's the people with skills, it's the people with vision, it's the entrepreneurs, the leaders who we need to want to make New Zealand a home. And for us, that's living in a society with a fabulous environment and a decent equality where we can look forward to a good quality of life. And I think that's bound up with how we can attract the best people to come to New Zealand. And finally, I think there's some proactive things that can be done to support technology and manufacturing through, for example, the use of clusters to build particular competencies and expertise within New Zealand. And I think, again, it's part of a much more active program from government to prioritise our industries of the future and not our polluting and failing industries of the past.
Great, thank you. Okay, any questions on growth from the floor?
If I may, I'm going to run the mic so that your question is picked up on the stream as well. So when you get the nod, wait for the mic.
Right.
Thank you for your comments. My question is, if we do not allow foreign investors to own equity in the businesses that they invest into New Zealand, how do you envisage that would work and attract investment?
Brett?
It wouldn't. if no one's going to invest a significant amount of money if there's no equity in the investment for them. So if we refused ownership for the investor, whether that investor was domestic or foreign, they wouldn't invest.
Tracy?
Sorry, name me 3 countries where you can't go and own equity when you invest in them. If you invest in a company, what you want out the other side is you want some profit margin, right? You want to be paid. You want the share price to go up. You want to do whatever. That's what we're talking about. I don't understand the concept. What you're saying is that, are you saying that unless an investor can own the whole shebang, that they're not going to come to New Zealand? That if you've got something that is worth investing in that will gain a profit for somebody from overseas and they can only get 30% of it or whatever, so that you remain, the controlling share remains in New Zealand hands, that's not going to be attractive?
Still foreign ownership.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well then, that's unfortunate. Then I would say that your product's not good enough. But, no, hang on. I'm not talking about your product. Are you saying that you've got to pitch to somebody and unless they can own the whole shebang, they're not prepared to invest in you?
Why would they put their money into your business if they can't have a fair say on the way in which your business is run?
And what's a fair say? You're saying to me that only a fair say is only if they have controlling interests.
Well, enough of it.
Yeah.
Enough of a voice that they're not going to take your money and then find that you are not going to take the technology in the direction that they want it to be taken. They're investing in something. They don't want to see you actually take the money and retire. Where's the control? If you kind of put a cap at a point below where they've got enough say to make sure that you're going in the right direction, I think it's kind of ill-conceived.
Yep. Barry?
So the Green Party doesn't have rules against foreign investment in that way. The one area that we would like to see is we'd like to see the Overseas Investment Office operate better. At the moment, it's slow, clumsy, not particularly transparent, and I think doesn't really help the process for foreign investors. We would like there to be a better process of screening foreign investment for where it's clear that New Zealand will benefit, and there are some areas where I think that the purchase of New Zealand strategic assets from abroad is not in the public interest, and we should retain the right to be able to question those investments. But we're certainly not saying that there shouldn't be foreign investment in New Zealand, including foreign ownership.
Can I just quickly make a point on that? We have to be very careful when we tread on a ground of what is something strategic or not, because these aren't our assets. They are the assets of the investors, the people that own the shares. It's not our decision about whether you can sell your house, or in this case, your tech business, to someone else. It's your business, not our business.
Okay. Any other questions from the floor? Yes.
Have you started
one down here.
Oh,
there we go. Yep. Sorry. Yeah.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep.
One thing I want to make a point and put the question that I see a conflict. I do a lot of work in what's called the angel innovation sector, and the standard pitch for startup innovation companies, and there's a lot of them doing a lot of really good innovation, a lot of fantastic ideas, is trade sale exit to offshore companies. Yep. So if you limit the foreign ownership, you're basically going to curtail the whole kind of drive for startup innovation by cutting off the exit strategies of a lot of the innovation businesses.
Unless you replace the angel funding.
I don't see how that works with the idea of curtailing foreign ownership.
Unless you replace the angel funding.
Entrepreneurs look for exits.
Huh?
Okay.
Is that not true? So
One
unless
more?
you replace the funding with something that you don't need to have the capacity to sell it offshore, that's what you're saying is that they started just to sell it.
That's called cash flow.
Yes.
But also they bring more benefits than just cash. They bring networks, they bring other expertise.
I can't see you.
Sure. And can I maybe I haven't been clear enough. I'm saying if you've started a company using research money from New Zealand taxpayers, then there is a responsibility on whoever took the New Zealand taxpayers' money to start up a company to either, if they do sell it on, then they actually pay that back. I'm not talking about making a law so that nobody in private business can sell their business. That would be ridiculous. Sorry, I obviously did not express myself clearly.
Right, okay.
Sorry.
Sorry, hold on. Is there something down the back there? Yep.
Yeah,
okay.
Matthew Jackson, Dr. To Go.
Yep.
So I work in global startups, and one of the things that happens when we look at talking to government agencies is that as soon as I go into a procurement process, I step right out of it because it's arduous. They often don't know what questions to ask us, and if you compare us against a global technology provider with a local distributor, then they're going to have a significantly bigger asset base than us and seem like a lower risk approach, but probably not really know what the market needs. So what is your party's view on how do we change the procurement process to really help government agencies be innovative?
Yeah. Barry.
So I think one of the things that has happened is that procurement has been bundled into larger and larger packages, so that the ability, particularly of smaller companies, to be able to access procurement from the New Zealand government has been diminished. And the UK has had a very good program to address exactly that over the past decade. And they have gained significantly from the unbundling of many of their technology purchases to enable local companies innovative solutions rather than the large completely turnkey solutions that we have come to see more of in New Zealand. They've also had a marketplace where there's increased transparency and a greater opportunity for SMEs to be able to access a procurement process. I think that kind of approach would be very good in New Zealand. I think we're in danger of privileging the larger companies, often offshore companies, in procurement rather than giving the start to New Zealand companies, which is often the way they get started in business.
Thank you, Barry. Brett?
Thank you. So the first real part of the question, I think, is absolutely we're committed to as streamlined a procurement process as good governance will allow, and there is an element of a natural tension in some parts of the process between the two. I'd make a point on the multinationals, having worked for a couple of them. They don't enjoy the procurement process any more than you do, and they certainly don't enjoy the expense that comes with responding to even some of the quite smaller ones that are out there. But I'd actually say that, and so given that we should always look to refine the procurement process to make sure it's fit for purpose, and that people are using the proper assessments, particularly when they're assessing a New Zealand company as part of that. But I actually think the problem stems from well before the procurement process. I think the real challenge is getting New Zealand businesses, particularly smaller businesses and startups, getting them airtime with the decision makers in our agencies. And I don't think that's something that can be legislated or simply mandated, but I do think it's a culture, if you will, that we should look to create and monitor. Because I think a lot of Kiwi businesses with a lot of great ideas and products and services, the real challenge is those things becoming known to the people who make decisions. And I could use an example. Some pilot funding was given to a company called 8 Wired, or Number 8 Wired, around data transfer. It's got strong relevance to the social investment unit, or the social investment approach. But actually that came about because someone like me got them introduced to someone who had a bit of influence. And I don't think that's the way it should work in practice. No. What we need is agencies, particularly CIOs, being open to hearing from the marketplace.
Isn't that a problem with the government procurement, though, because it builds these panels up?
No, it's all pre-procurement, though. It's all pre-procurement,
right.
That stuff.
I've
always maintained, and sure, I work for larger companies, not smaller, but I've always maintained that if you're trying to sell something in the procurement stage, you've probably already lost.
Tracy?
Yeah, well, so we're from New Zealand First, right? So from our perspective, there should be weighting that actually you go to, whether it be your government or anybody else, you go to New Zealand companies first. The problem we've got with that, and when I was part of the Auckland Council, the problem we had with that is when we tried to do buy local, from the council perspective, we had to include Australia and Singapore because of trade agreements. So when you say buy local, we had to take tenders from those people. So I think Nova Pay is a perfect example of the government going offshore and picking up a company for a major contract with a company that had no experience in it at all, and not picking up that there was a New Zealand companies that had like Xero, for example, or even Datacom that was still based here, well, still had some capacity here in New Zealand, to actually do that job.
Thank you very much. Now we're going to move on to another topic, R&D and funding. Most governments in the OECD provide a mix of direct research grants, like New Zealand does through Callaghan Innovation, and some form of R&D tax credits. For example, 28 of 34 OECD countries give preferential tax treatment to businesses' R&D expenses. However, New Zealand decided to halt our program despite New Zealand averaging less than half the level of business R&D spending as Australia and the OECD average. Let's start with National. Why won't you support industry with R&D tax credits like most other countries? And for the whole panel, what's your policy and what's the right mix between tax credits and research grants?
Fundamentally, because I'd say argue that the model we have through our various research funding, particularly the Callaghan innovation grants, is a better way of testing the validity of an idea and a product. The problem with the tax credits, certainly as they were implemented in the earlier 2000s in New Zealand, is they were rorted on a daily basis. Now, I know that at the time, the Australians actually advised us not to use the definition that we ended up using, but we went ahead apparently because it was all about harmonisation with Australia. But what would then happen is that companies were able to use loopholes or interpretations of that wording to reclassify things like maintenance activities as R&D and get credits from them. And I know this because customers told me at the time that's what they were doing.
Isn't that a fix of the definition, though?
Well, actually, to the point of the Callaghan model and why I think it's a better one is it uses the best test of all. By having a co-funding, if you will, by having a requirement for private sector funding in the idea and business, you're actually providing the very best test of is this an idea or concept or product worth pursuing? Because if other people are prepared to put their own money into it, then it's a very clear sign that the idea or product's got legs.
Barry.
I think we've got the system out of balance. I think there is some good work funded by Callaghan and other grant-making schemes, but I think the balance is wrong. We'd certainly go for a tax credit, R&D tax credit of $1 billion was part of our campaign last year, and we haven't last election. We haven't announced our policy this time yet. But certainly we would see tax credits being the direction that we would go in. And one of the problems with relying entirely on grant funding is you get a lot of very good proposal writers and you get some skewed priorities from grant funding that I think is not necessarily the best outcome for innovation in New Zealand. So we'd certainly say that the mix needs to change.
Tracy.
So we've already announced that we would increase research and development funding, just across the bottom line, but I can't off the top of my head remember what percentage of GDP it was. We've already committed to lowering taxes for the corporate tax for export and development companies. I'm pretty sure that's 20%. And the problem with the co-funding model is that smaller players with great ideas have a great deal of difficulty developing something that will benefit the nation. And I'm thinking of Mahirangi Technical Institute. It's working on an eel breeding program that if we could farm eel and stop taking it out of the wild, the capacity for that business is enormous for this country. But they are a small person in the middle of Warkworth working with the Japanese, so that IP will belong to the Japanese when they crack it, because we won't fund it.
Okay, questions from the floor. What have we got? Yes, down here.
The problem with co-funding for a small company is it still has to raise half the money. So if they need $200,000, they've still got to raise $100,000. And do they have the skills and competencies to do that? And the bottom line is, no, they don't.
So the grant system, and I'm not talking about the most earliest stage of investment, but the grant system allows for very small stages of progress. So you don't actually have to find $100,000 to necessarily get into that process. The very first stage of it might be finding a private capital of more like $10,000 to $20,000, depending on the nature of the actual company and idea. But it's not some big bite off a huge grant that you have to have enormous amounts of upfront private investment money for. It's a staged thing. You go through gates, and sure, if you can't raise that private cash for the next gate, you won't proceed, but you certainly don't have to have it all up front.
Barry.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we ought to be careful of is not saying that there should be a duality, either one or the other. There is a place for both. New Zealand's sitting at about half of the OECD average of spend on R&D, and it's not good enough. We should ramp up, and certainly we would see tax credits as a way to increase the level of spend across the economy. So, both are required, both have their place.
Is the level of spending of R&D is it actually a reflection of something good or bad? Would you also make the case like we need less spending on it to be successful?
I would have said it reflects to some extent New Zealand's lagging productivity. I mean, we're way down the list of productivity data across the OECD again, and it hasn't picked up under this government, nor have exports as a percent of GDP. So we have a problem here, and there is this kind of tangled web of a lack of investment, meaning that we're not raising productivity, and low productivity, meaning that we're not having sufficient opportunities for the investment. So I think that. To get out of this, we do need some more support of innovation and through, for example, tax credits, but also we need to deal with some of the other problems related to productivity having been flat.
That's a very big topic, I think.
They include the fact that New Zealanders put all their money into houses instead of into productive investment, and it's because our tax system doesn't have a capital gains tax. So there are very structural things that need to be addressed as well.
Is the capital gains tax part of the Greens policy?
Indeed.
Okay.
We haven't announced it.
So several things on this.
It has been announced.
Several points on this.
We announced it at the last election.
First of all, the decision you're talking about R&D is actually a decision about what a business is doing with its own working capital. All right. So it's the real question here is why are they not seeing it as a good idea? It's not a government thing. It's not an agency thing. And the whole idea of whether it's tax credits or grant-based, it's about priming the pump to get business to see that it's actually in their best interest to make this investment. And by far the vast bulk of benefits accrue to that business. And so they should fund it, more of it. To the point on the capital gains tax, there has not yet been a party in New Zealand that has proposed a differential capital gains tax. And there is no way you will ever incentivise one investment or savings behaviour over another if you tax them all the same. And both of them, or both Labour and Greens, their CGT policies are tax every capital asset at the same rate. That doesn't create an incentive to do a productive investment over a house.
Yeah, let's be clear, that's not New Zealand First. Beg your pardon?
Doesn't the fact that we don't have an even
Exactly.
approach mean we're creating an incentive today?
Well, you've got the same incentive, because neither of them are taxed. No, because neither of those investments are taxed on the capital gain.
If you put the lack of a capital gains tax together with the tax deductibility of interest on your mortgage, you have a very, very powerful mechanism for house price speculation.
Businesses have tax deductibility on their loans and on their business expenses.
Tracy.
The models are the same.
We don't have a capital gains tax.
Okay, I'm going to move on to... Oh, we've got one more question over here.
I think this question goes towards the policy person that's on the table there. How open will it be for governments or even commercial businesses to actually make that transition from implementing the technology into schools, especially with the technology moving quickly, and it is, how and what time frame? Because you've got a lot of research going on, a lot of capital spent in that area. So out of that, it must be a percentage target area that you want to reach before that actually comes to a stream of delivering anything, because it's going to get wider if it's left there longer. From our experience developing over internationally, it's actually created no technology at all, and it's just frozen it.
So is this specifically talking about digital isolation and the gap?
Absolutely.
I'm sorry if I had the answer of how long that study's going to take, I will give it to you. I don't know, but it's something that is a priority under the program.
Very quickly, yep. Agreed.
I
Yeah.
just agree with Chris.
And Tracy. Yep.
Same.
Okay. Moving on to the next topic, we've got the future of government. We'll start off with privacy. There's been a big push from the Five Eyes countries to ban end-to-end encryption on the internet, basically trying to prevent citizens from communicating privately without the government being able to listen in. When asked how this would work in practice, given it's impossible for providers to give access to encrypted communications, Australian PM Malcolm Turnbull even went so far as to say, I think quite famously now, the laws of mathematics are commendable, but Australian law prevails in Australia. We haven't heard much from New Zealand on this, so what is your party's stance on allowing encryption on the internet? Tracy?
Yeah, I had this conversation recently. Was it with you, Graham? Or was it with somebody else that came to see me? And we don't have a policy space on this. This is a developing space for us. So this is a space that we would rather talk more, because citizens should be able to trust that they can communicate privately on their devices. And it doesn't seem logical to us that a device maker, a supplier, has to provide any government with a back door into a device. So this is a conversation we want to have a further discussion around. We don't have a policy space right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Barry?
I think this raises a very serious issue about the erosion of privacy provisions that are going on across society. Certainly, I think individuals should have the right to use encryption. I've been on select committees recently where the Security and Intelligence Bill, the Customs Bill, and more recently Money Laundering Bill all had potential intrusions into the use of private information by government agencies. I think there's a major problem. We have a government that I think is for some reason pushing really hard for gathering data on New Zealand citizens in a way that I think we should be very concerned around the privacy of our information. I'm also concerned in trade agreements about our private information being going offshore to sit on somebody else's computer server, where in the United States or elsewhere, where we don't have control over the privacy provisions that are related to that information, and that is increasingly being required under trade agreements, that we cannot restrict the privacy of information to New Zealand servers. So I think in a number of areas we have some very deep concerns ahead of us, and certainly we would look to be far more serious.
I know Barry is a user of Signal as well on his phone, because I get to see that. So, Brett.
So the heart of the actual question is about a tension between individual privacy and public safety. And it's not an easy discussion, let alone an easy answer. What I do know is that that we don't enter into any consideration in this area without putting individual privacy as part of the consideration. I commend Internet New Zealand on the paper they did recently in this area. And one point in it you made is that the risk of terrorist or those sort of criminal activities in New Zealand is probably quite low. And I would agree with that. But the impact of it is potentially disproportionately high. So we don't have a fixed policy. Obviously we have security and other trading partners that are looking to forge a path. We certainly haven't come out and supported the line that Malcolm Turnbull's taken. I do know, having sitting in our caucus, that intrusions or state seeking of information does not go untested by the 59 national MPs when an initiative goes forward. Like, for instance, the recent customs change, which I can tell you was amended quite substantially because of caucus members' concerns about intrusions on privacy.
And opposition parties.
Well, that was in our caucus room, so I can tell you that it was quite a fierce discussion.
Okay, so privacy.
We know because we were listening.
Damn, there goes our privacy.
Privacy and Big Brother. Any takers from the floor? Got any questions there? Encryption. Who values encryption? Down the end. Oh.
The IRD used to be secure and privacy. now information is being shared around all government departments.
Information sharing, particularly out of IRD, is subject to memoranda of understanding, so it's a very controlled thing. And to Barry's earlier point about collection of data, the state has collected data on the citizens for as long as we've had computers, and even before then actually, and quite a lot of it. What is being done more now is actually turning data into information so that sensible public policy and targeted public policy can be directed.
Yeah, can I speak to that?
We have no problem at all in anonymised data which is used for analysis across classes of people. But when you have individualised data used for social investment, when you have requests from Social Security to NGOs that data on their clients have to be given to the government, when you have government departments accidentally sending out people's data by mistake, this is where you start to have real problems, and we have got real problems, and you're exactly right. It's the sharing of information across government departments has become pervasive, and yes, it is covered by agreements, but those agreements are usually between government officials. So is there proper accountability on this? The Privacy Commissioner is absolutely right to be extremely worried about the prevalence of these kind of information sharing agreements.
And I would have to say that I think that the New Zealand public doesn't realise how big it is. A piece of legislation was passed last term, actually, and I don't know how many of you are aware of it, but that piece of legislation said that when a person leaves school, that through their national student number, all their academic data must be sent to the Ministry of Social Development, regardless of who they were. All of it must be sent to the Ministry of Social Development. The Ministry of Social Development will do a risk assessment on it. A risk assessment based on, was there a beneficiary in their family, what were their scores, and so on and so forth. And then they will pass that on to a NEETs provider, and not an education, employment or training provider, that is contracted in that particular area where that student lives. That NEETs provider will then use that information to ring that student and say, hey, what are you doing? And if they say, well, I'm going to the University of Auckland, they say, that's great. And they tick them off in a box. Do you know that? Do you know that for the last 4 years, every single school leaver has had all their academic information through their national student number sent to the Ministry of Social Development? Now, you see, I think the New Zealand public needs to know when this legislation goes through, the government has a role in making sure that you, the public, know what is actually happening with the sharing.
Thank you. And we've got nothing else there? Very good.
I'll ask one bonus one. Can I get a commitment from all three of you that should anyone utter the idea that the law of mathematics needs to be subsumed to the laws of New Zealand, that you slap them in the head? Deal.
That's right. Well, that's what they used to do to them.
So is that an excuse? So if I slap somebody in the head and get in trouble for it, are you guys all showing up in court for me?
Okay, so the future of government. What does the future of government look like from a digital perspective, and what would your party do to ensure government understands the changes to society that digital brings and responds accordingly? I think we'll start with Tracy.
Whoa, what a big question. And to be frank, part of Brent is on it, I'm on it, Gareth's on it, and Claire's on it. We're the MPs supposed to represent the digital environment in Parliament, and it's our job to upskill the rest of the parliamentarians. To be frank, I don't have a major answer to that, except that what we've got is a parliament that is not highly understanding of what this industry is and its true capacity for the country, I don't think. I think if you had 121 MPs, how many of them do you think would really be able to answer what is the potential and how does this industry now weave through everything that we have coming in our future? What would you say to that?
Well, that's a really good point, actually, because the history of ICT is that it's always seen as an expense to business.
Yeah.
And it was typically very difficult to get investment from. But what would the future look like? And I'm not going to try and do a Bill Gates thing, but fundamentally it will be people using technology to help them run their lives better and having the choice of what element of its lives it would operate upon. It might organise their day. It might help run elements of their house. It might help run what they consume, how they measure their leisure time. In business, we'd see businesses harnessing technology to optimise whatever business process is an issue to them, they might use it to develop new products. They'd certainly use it to better service customers and help to maintain better customer retention. And you know, it would be far more. In fact, it's almost embedded now, because apparently we look at these things around 2,500 times a day, which is a number that still staggers me, but it's becoming an absolute natural part of our lives. So we'll see it on roads, not just the vehicles, but how we manage transportation systems. We'll know it when technology is so ubiquitous that it's just part of everything that we choose to do, in a very positive way, I might add.
And we're rapidly heading that way. Barry?
So with regard to the future of government, there's one level around the availability of government services to members of the public online and accessibly. I think the other one is that really is, you know, we're missing is the role of government in encouraging business in the digital space to take on international leadership. And I think that we've got some fabulous stories. And I really, you know, think that the government isn't out there being the champions of our new technology-rich sectors. You know, and one of the things that the Green Party has done is highlighted the opportunities for the gaming sector, for example, where we do have a position and a developing kind of international expertise. And I think in so many other areas we could be doing much more if there was positive government support for the development of our high-tech sector, and I see the government as much more throwing money at irrigation and dairy farmers and at oil and gas exploration and things like that, which is the old polluting economy of the past, rather than looking forward and helping to co-create the economy of the future. And I think that's really the task ahead of the next government.
Yes.
So, given the position of the panellists with regard to the digital environment, can I ask a clarificatory and possibly semi-rhetorical question? What's the non-digital environment?
What's the non-digital environment? Well, we're struggling more and more to have any of that. To Barry's point about the so-called polluting economy, one of the best avenues and options for technologies in use in our primary industries. Things like precision farming, things that enable us to get greater yield and greater profitability across our farms while shrinking. That's what I'm saying is that it's shrinking. There is less and less part of our lives, our workplaces, and our environment that is not impacted or could not be impacted positively in some way through digital technology. It's shrinking. Yeah. What does it look like? No, you can't describe it because it no longer, well, it doesn't really exist, does it?
I'm picturing a beach, really. But, I mean, you can take all sorts of... Well, I'm being really literal about the word environment, is what I'm being really literal about. But that's because I had all that time that he spoke to actually think about it, really.
Barry? No, pass.
So do you think it would be worthwhile convincing your parliamentary...
Oh, believe me, mate, we try. Yeah. Honestly, we do. We've had night after night where we've tried to bring them in. We've even told them that this can help you get re-elected. I mean, that's how desperate we were. And we did it across party.
In fairness to colleagues from across the House, there's a lot of stuff that goes on and a lot of competing demands for attention, a lot of industries, a lot of interesting work and important work that goes on across a lot of sectors. So even when we're trying to increase awareness, we're effectively competing for time and attention with other things.
Okay, and I think we have one more question down the end. Just wait for the microphone. Hold on, the microphone's coming your way.
There you go, mate. Thank you. If you're talking about uneducated MPs, why don't you have a better selection?
Well, look,
Come on.
In all fairness,
this is not the only industry on the whole of the planet. Just quietly.
That's exactly right. So, I might know technology and a colleague of mine doesn't, but then they might well be a lawyer and I can't talk to the mechanics and details of the law, or they might be an engineer, a doctor, medical doctor, they might have worked in mental health, might be a biochemist. Everyone has skills that they bring to Parliament, and it's good that we have a broadly representative Parliament.
Or the solution would be to vote Green.
Okay. Now, all humour aside, we're just over time at the moment, so the next section is open questions from the floor. So, an open question from the floor.
So I'm just curious if you
wait, microphone, yep.
I'm just curious, if you can't imagine, or you're finding it harder and harder to find a part of life that doesn't involve technology, then why do you treat the training of technology like woodwork and metalwork and not like a core skill?
Well, I do think that the recent digital fluency announcement signals a very big shift away from that, particularly with the investment in teaching development and skills development for the teachers, the educators of digital technology or fluency. But I can think of a couple of things that are low tech. So tomorrow and Saturday, we'll all be getting ready to put up timber frames and plastic signs that you'll all have the joy for the next 9 weeks of seeing.
They were digitally
and that's
printed.
pretty low tech, I can tell you
I'll tell you what, we're all thanking our lucky stars that we haven't rolled out electronic voting already.
Actually, yeah, I discussed that. I discussed that in Lusaka at the IPU, and I think that's a long way away.
Okay, so any other responses to that? No? Oh, we've got another question. Yes, question over here.
I just want to go back to the security and privacy of data. So any comments about patient health data? Like, so for example, any of you here knows how to access or where to access your health data from your doctors?
No.
I think there's a identifier program going on at the moment, isn't there? A single health identifier program underway?
Oh, well, we've had single health, well, supposedly had single health numbers for a long, long time, although it never used to work that way in practice. But your private health, personal health data is private, absolutely private, and it shouldn't be. It's not to be shared other than with people whom you authorise, which fundamentally generally means medical practitioners. Now, the governments don't look at individual health records to get stats or information on people's conditions, ailments, or status.
Just a follow-up question. So how do you answer this? Who owns the data?
I can't answer that legally, but I would default to saying I would have thought that the individual owns their own data.
I would have thought I do.
Barry, did you want to say something there?
No, that's fine.
But if you mean in terms of can we roll that up into summary type statistics and use modelling and trend and analysis on that, well, absolutely. The people, particularly if people are participants, are patients in a public health system. But we don't do individual level medical health record analysis.
Any more questions? We got one from the internet. Andrew.
Yeah, I'd like to, on behalf of my correspondents, what about e-waste? With all of this tech stuff going everywhere, there's ever more stuff going in the bin as well. And are we doing well enough to make sure that that's not damaging the environment too?
Well, we certainly have companies that are focused on that. I've got one of those in Ohio, actually. I'm very proud of having recycled all that now. I think one of the challenges, and we have had this and still have this in other materials as well, is someone coming up with a bright idea on how to use what is currently waste in another process. And although it's kind of moving away to a completely different industry, I was at New Zealand Steel for the last couple of days, and there are people here in Auckland that have discovered a cunning way to not only get titanium dioxide out of the slag from the steelmaking process, but to reutilise some of the toxic waste that's generated in getting that titanium dioxide. Never been done before. So that, and in e-waste is the same thing. We need bright spark people coming up with innovative ways to utilise components of our waste in ways that haven't been previously.
One of the big challenges of that is that the price of those minerals has declined quite a lot in recent years, so it's becoming much less economic to recover. And there's quite a lot of fraud emerging in the States, for instance, on the programs in the States, because people can't actually make a bug out of it.
I think we have a major problem in our waste management sector, and e-waste is just part of it. What I think we've done is to join others in the world and assume that our society doesn't have boundaries in terms of where we can put our waste and the effects of that waste. We have toxic waste leaches that are legacy from the past that we haven't cleaned up yet, and we're about to make some more through e-waste. And I think it's just a cavalier attitude to our waste, and we need to be sheeting some of the responsibility back to the manufacturers as well as loading it on consumers.
Thank you, guys. I'd just like to offer you all, we've actually finished the end of our program, we're a little bit over time, so I'd like to offer you all a quick minute to basically sum up anything you'd like to say in conclusion statements. We're going in reverse order of the way we started, so we're going to start with Barry from the Greens.
Thank you. Thank you all for allowing me to be a part of this. And, I really think this is an issue where we need to build tech into much more of an economic strategy that looks to our future, that creates a modern economy, creates a high-tech, low-impact economy that doesn't rely on agricultural commodities for our future income, but actually looks at the application of technologies in all sectors, but also as a sector in its own right. And I see great prospects, but I think it needs a far more active government approach in order to be doing things like the Greens have a digital manufacturing strategy, a minister for manufacturing, etc. I think those are the kind of approaches that can really focus the attention of government on partnering with business in order to create a real advantage for us in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I've lost my...
It's Brett.
It's Brett. There we go.
Look, to just sum up, what I would say is I'd love to see the digital economy or digital businesses continue to grow the way they have done and go absolutely gangbusters. We have a very different premise to the economy to others. It's not a zero-sum game. The reality is that we can continue to do what are traditional strengths in the New Zealand economy. In fact, we can do them better through technology to minimise their environmental footprints. But at the same time, we can equally have a burgeoning or really thriving digital sector as well, particularly if we're open to investment both domestically and from foreign investors. I would reiterate what I said at the beginning, is that we are focused on helping to eliminate what some of the key constraints are, so making sure that businesses have access to foreign markets, that they are protected in their business dealings in those markets, that we are developing the skills in New Zealand to support your businesses and new ventures, and that we're getting migrants in with skills to fill the gaps that exist today, and that we are obviously strengthening our schooling and post-grad studies to support that. But we also just finished, I didn't mention before, but we have a investment attraction strategy, and I can tell you today that, already today, we are actively looking to recruit investors into the New Zealand economy, including into this very important sector.
Great, thank you very much. Look, that's the end of the program tonight.
Oh,
sorry, Tracy.
So I'm also the spokesperson for women. Sorry, just saying. So we haven't talked at all about women in tech. There's no questions here about women in tech, about the workforce, about how we're going to actually make sure that 52% of what is our public knows that this is an opportunity for them, and how are we going to encourage and enhance and show leadership in that space. So that's a conversation I'd like to have with your sector more. And that goes hand in hand with how we deliver inside the education sector, and it goes hand in hand with how we support our young people to actually get post-secondary school education. And the only other thing is, I'm going to reiterate it again, do not expect parliamentarians to be experts in your field. You are the experts in your field. So make sure that you talk to us, and talk to us in between election years. Don't wait for us to come and talk to you. Make sure that we come to your conferences and sit and listen to the speakers at your conferences. Make sure that we participate all the way through, every part of the 3 years. I've been there for 6 years, and it's really only in the last couple that I've actually had people, because now we look popular, starting to come into my office wanting me to know about their sector. And so I reiterate, talk to the Parliament so that we don't have to catch up when we finally take over the government in 2013.
Great. Thank you for that finishing note. I'd like to thank our panel. Barry, obviously you came in at very short notice today, so thank you very much for coming. That was great. You didn't come across like the most junior Green MP, I can tell you that. Tracy, thank you very much.
Sure.
Well, and Brett, thank you for coming for National. So thank you all for coming as well, and on the internet. And thank you to Tech NZ. I think Paul might want to have a word.
So just saying quickly that we're doing it all again, or continuing the conversation on the 30th of August. That one's going to be in Wellington, but I think we're telecasting that over the internet as well.
Okay.
I did come and see you on your third week in the
You
role.
did. You did. You did.
Oh,
I'm not saying that you didn't, darling. Thank you. I said some people were now rushing to my office. There you go.
Okay.
So thanks to the panel, and a big thanks to Rob O'Neill as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Well done. Right.
So hopefully the panel will join us as well.
Cool.
Brilliant. Thank you. Whoops.